Hey guys, I'm going to rant to you about contemporary morals because I've been thinking about this in light of the most recent events in Donald Trump world, where he puts out a tweet saying that the last time Mika Brzezinski was at Mar-a-Lago, she was bleeding profusely from the face from a facelift, which I thought was particularly hilarious. And she and the people on that show have been insulting Donald Trump personally, not just criticizing his policy as they claim, but insulting him personally throughout the campaign and during his presidency. So, he's only reacting, and I think they're calling him thin-skinned, but it's very clear from the way that they're reacting that they're actually the thin-skinned ones. But they get up on their show on their moral high horses, and it's extremely obvious that they're complete hypocrites. But I think it's time to rant about contemporary morals. And this is just something that I noticed that kind of fits in the theme. So something I've noticed is a lot of millennials are not very certain about their moral compass. It's not that they don't necessarily have a moral compass, but that they've taken their intellect and overridden their moral compass because they think that they can rationalize better and override their intuition and their gut. I don't know how people live with their own sense of guilt. Personally, it eats me up if I feel guilty about something. I don't feel that guilty about a lot of things, but it's very difficult in my recent life anyway to use my intellect to override intuition and sense of right and wrong. But I think one of the reasons is because everyone in society is intermixed, and they all have different ideas of right and wrong, different degrees to which they believe in right and wrong and exemplifying right and wrong, and then different levels of personal ambition at the expense of principles. And because they're all intermixed, it gets confusing. It's really easy to diverge from your parents' worldview because of this, because you're not spending as much time with your parents and you're spending a lot more time with other influences. And you also have the internet, which you can go from one ideology to another in 2 days of a YouTube train. It's a very difficult moral landscape to navigate, I suppose. But what I want to suggest is you watch Survive the Drive. He makes very good videos, and he has one video about who Odin was, the concept of Odin across the different Germanic pagan cultures, religions. And the basic idea that I got from it was he makes a comparison to the Holy Trinity, but this is something that he says predates the Holy Trinity. So you have Odin, which is the archetype, but also like the supreme ruler of the gods. He is the ultimate person to be all the good values exemplified in that. So then you have an analog to the Holy Spirit, which is just divine inspiration, which Odin can choose to use a man to be Odin, sometimes through sacrificial rites. And then you have the man who is Odin because he exemplifies the archetype. So you have those three aspects of it. And you don't even need the concept of Odin to use this to become what you think is the good person. You can see the archetype of what you know is a good person, because everyone has that, unless you had some weird childhood where you heard like Aesop's fables and the Greek myths and these stories of heroes, which are ubiquitous in every story that kids are given. Unless you didn't look up to those heroes, then you have those heroes in your psyche, and you know that they are good people, and that's like what the ultimate person is. It's just a matter of whether you were disenchanted or jaded and stopped pursuing those hero mentalities or exemplifying those heroic values. You have those archetypes, so it's just a matter of you finding the drive, the divine inspiration to become the archetype. And I don't think it's something you can really choose. I think it's just got to be kind of organic, because you can't give yourself motivation. Either you're motivated or you're not, because you can say you just need to motivate yourself, but if you're not motivated to be motivated, you're SOL, I suppose. So there is that aspect of divine inspiration, but you also need to try. So it's like you can't stop trying, because then you'll never get the divine inspiration, but you also can't force things beyond what you're capable of. So It's just a matter of reinforcing the good things that you're capable of reinforcing, and that becoming a snowball effect towards your pursuing your exemplification of the archetypal values of goodness and heroism and virtue and honor, which are ever present within the cultures in Western worlds, particularly, as Survive the Drive points out, the ones that branched off from the Indo-European linguistic group or ethnic group or whatever it was, particularly from their religion and their ideas of honor. Now, the reason I think this is so important to personally try to become the archetype of goodness is because not only in the public discourse, it's ever present in the public discourse, but also in my own personal life, my interactions with friends, people that I had serious discussions with. There's a lot of talking about values and trying to explain to another person why your way of doing things or believing things is the best way or the better way, and then there's discourse that goes on between it. But it's very rare that you get a situation where the two people can both be teachers and students simultaneously and detach themselves personally from the ideas and the beliefs and even the habits that they have. Because you can detach yourself from any habit or behavior that you have if you just take the step back from yourself, observe yourself, and say, is this habit good? Is this habit bad? Is it constructive? Is it destructive? And then you take that level of detachment to change yourself. And that's all it takes. And that if everyone had the capability for that level of detachment from their beliefs and such, then we could have an ideal world where everyone could be a teacher and a student simultaneously. Anyone could teach anyone anything, and anyone could learn anything from anyone, because everyone has something to learn and teach from everyone. But that's not the way the world is. And in most cases, when you tell someone a better way of doing something, or if you tell them, like you try to make a moral call to them, it's really just a confrontational sort of thing where they just get defensive and they won't listen regardless of whether what you have to say is valid or not. They won't even assess whether it's valid or not. They just go straight to it's invalid, and you don't. The most common thing is like, you don't understand. You don't understand me. You don't understand my situation. You don't know what it's like, that sort of thing, which is a complete cop-out. But it's not going to stop people. Pointing that out is not going to stop people from it either. They're just going to get more pissed off and maybe stop talking to you or hit you or something. So, yeah, there's really no point in even engaging in that discourse. I think the best way, if you think that the world should be a way, like you have an idea that maybe you're like me and you think the old world values, not all of them, but the specific ones that you're focusing on, it's difficult to communicate what I'm talking about, but you can get the sense of these values from watching things like Survive the Drive's videos and his talks on morals, or Varg's videos, Thulian perspective, or really just getting into any of the YouTubers or who are now talking about like the anti-SJW movement and stuff. They're kind of saying things like, maybe our parents were right about stuff, or maybe our grandparents, more specifically grandparents, not parents, but maybe they were right about stuff and we were wrong to branch off from them. Anyway, maybe you think that the world used to be better than it is now, and then we should take those old values. Not necessarily that it was perfect, but maybe you think that is what the way the world should be. I think not because it's less vain or more morally superior to not tell people what to do and just do it yourself. Not because of that, but just because it's more effective. That's why you should exemplify the archetype as opposed to engaging in discourse with people. Now, this is a YouTube video. I think it's a much different thing, because I think if anyone is bothering to take their time to watch this YouTube video, then they have some level of curiosity and are trying to learn something. Of course, you're going to have people who just like to make rude comments or argue for the sake of arguing, but generally, if you've wasted your time watching me talk about this, then you are interested in what I have to say, or you want to learn something from the ideas, not from me, from the ideas that are being discussed. So don't bother engaging in the discourse because it's not effective, because people just get defensive. And it just seems to be the way that things are. And in my life, I've found that small gestures, I try to make these small gestures to exemplify these values. For example, my grandmother is Italian, and growing up, she always had food and always shared food with everyone that came over. So my grandfather rented out a house. The tenants were not that great. They let their dog destroy the house and stuff. I think they were always late with rent. But every time they would come over to pay the rent check, my grandmother would say, "Oh, come in, sit down, have some coffee. Are you hungry?" And then she would give them a full course meal just because they came over to pay the rent check. They weren't friends or anything, but she would feed them, and they would accept. And it's like that with all the friends and stuff too, but that communing over food is something that really stuck with me. So as opposed to talking about how that's important to me, I mean, I talk about it sometimes when the subject comes up or when I feel it's important with really close friends, but it's not something I go around saying, you should have, if you really care about someone, then you should cook for them, and always share food because it's a communal thing and it's a good gesture. Instead of doing that, I just cook. I invite even acquaintances or distant friends over for dinner, and it's not, I never ever feel like it's me doing something nice for them. I just feel like it's part of the social interaction, and I think that's the way that it comes across, is that it's part of the social interaction. Maybe it seems a bit strange for me to be cooking for them and having them over for dinner, but I think subconsciously it separates from the normal social interactions, because at least in my social circle of millennials, it doesn't seem to be a very common thing for someone to cook a serious dinner, put a lot of thought into what is being cooked and a lot of effort, spend an hour or more cooking and then have someone over for dinner. It's not a very common thing, so maybe it seems strange, but I think it works in their subconscious mind as a good gesture, and maybe hopefully inspires, even if just minimally, a couple people. It's going to have a better impact, and it's going to come across as more genuine than you telling them that you wish that everyone was cooking for people more, because that's better than coming over to watch crap on Tumblr or play video games or whatever it is, like Netflix and chill stuff that kids do. So that's one way to apply it, is by cooking for things, but exemplifying the archetype yourself and treating yourself as the people that you think should be a different way, treating yourself as that person to make yourself the different way. Having that level of detachment is probably the most effective way to make the world the way that you want it to be, because I think ultimately the best ideas will prevail and become more commonplace, because that's just the process of natural selection, and it's just an organic thing that's going to happen, and it's going to take time. The world's not going to be the way that you want it necessarily, and even if you have the best idea in mind that will be favored by natural selection, it's not necessarily going to happen on the timeline that you want. So just do the best you can do and become the archetype. Hail Odin and Toodles.